The pre-flight checklist should have taken 15 minutes. Lieutenant Marcus Reed had been at it for 45. Reed, we're wheels up in 10. Captain Diana Walsh called from across the tarmac. Her patience wearing thin. What's the holdup? Marcus didn't look up from the cargo manifest in his hands. His finger traced the same line for the third time, double-checking fuel calculations that had already been triple-checked by ground crew. Just want to make sure everything's fine. Walsh cut him off. It's always fine. You do this every single flight. She wasn't wrong. In 6 months of transport missions, Marcus had never once taken off without running through every possible failure scenario. Hydraulics, electrical systems, weight distribution, weather patterns, backup communications, emergency landing sites. The other pilots called him Paranoid Reed behind his back, sometimes to his face. In the ready room that morning, Lieutenant Jake Morrison had mimicked Marcus's voice while checking an imaginary clipboard. But what if the backup to the backup fails? What if there's a bird strike and an engine fire and a solar flare all at once? The room had erupted in laughter. Marcus had just smiled tightly and kept reviewing his flight plan. Because the thing they didn't understand, the thing nobody wanted to hear, was that Marcus had reasons for his caution. Reasons that woke him up at 3 a.m. in a cold sweat. Reasons named Captain Stephen Reed, his older brother, who died in a helicopter crash in Iraq 8 years ago. Mechanical failure. Something that should have been caught in pre-flight. Something that could have been prevented if someone had just looked a little closer, checked one more time, asked one more question. Marcus had been 19 when he got the news. Stephen had been his hero, his inspiration for joining the Air Force, and Stephen had died because someone had been in a hurry. So Marcus was never in a hurry. Not anymore. Reed, Walsh's voice snapped him back. 10 minutes or you're grounded and I'm filing a report. Your co-pilot's already in the cockpit. Marcus grabbed his gear and jogged toward the C-130. His co-pilot, First Lieutenant Chris Novak, was indeed already strapped in, running through startup procedures with the easy confidence of someone who'd done this 1,000 times. Morning, Reed, Novak said without looking up. You finished memorizing the periodic table. Fuel calculations, Marcus replied evenly, sliding into his seat. We're carrying medical supplies to Forward Operating Base Phoenix. Heavy load. Wanted to make sure we had margin for the mountain crossings. Ground crew already did that. I know. I'd just like to verify. Novak glanced at him, something between amusement and pity in his eyes. You know what they say about you, right? I know. Doesn't bother you. Marcus began his own pre-flight checklist, hands moving methodically across the instrument panel. My brother died because someone didn't check carefully enough. So no, it doesn't bother me. The statement hung in the air. Novak's expression shifted. I didn't know you had a. Can you verify the aileron response? Marcus cut him off. He didn't talk about Stephen, not with anyone. They took off 12 minutes later, 2 minutes late, earning Marcus another mark in his growing reputation as the pilot who couldn't stay on schedule. The flight to FOB Phoenix was routine for the first 90 minutes. Clear skies, smooth air, radio chatter minimal. Novak handled most of the flying while Marcus monitored systems, ran calculations, and mentally mapped every emergency airfield between here and their destination. You ever just enjoy flying? Novak asked, watching Marcus scribble notes on his knee board. Like, for the fun of it. I enjoy flying when everyone lands safely. That's not the same thing. Marcus didn't answer. His eyes had caught something on the engine temperature gauge. Number 2. Engine reading was still in the green, but it had ticked up half a degree in the last 10 minutes. Probably nothing. Ambient temperature fluctuations. Completely normal. But Marcus made a note anyway and started watching the gauge more closely. See, this is what I'm talking about, Novak said, noticing Marcus's focus. That engine's fine. You're looking for problems that don't exist. I'm looking for problems before they exist. Same thing. It's really not. 10 minutes later, the engine temperature ticked up another half degree, still well within normal range. Still nothing to worry about. Marcus leaned forward slightly, eyes fixed on the gauge. Reed, seriously. The temperature jumped to full degrees in 30 seconds. Marcus's hand was already moving to the engine controls. I'm seeing abnormal temps on number 2. It's still in the green. It's trending wrong. Marcus's voice stayed calm, but his fingers were already pulling up the engine diagnostics on the multifunction display. Rate of change is too fast. Novak checked his own instruments. I don't see anything critical. Not yet. And then, as if the aircraft had been waiting for that exact moment to prove Marcus right, the number to engine fire warning light blazed red. The cockpit filled with the harsh beeping of the alarm, oil pressure dropping, temperature spiking, flames detected in the engine cowling. Fire, number to engine. Novak's training kicked in, his hands moving to the emergency procedures. But there was panic in his voice, the kind that comes when the impossible suddenly becomes real. Marcus's hands were already moving. No panic. No hesitation. Just the smooth, practiced efficiency of someone who had rehearsed this exact scenario in his head 500 times. Throttled it to idle. Fuel cut off. Fire suppression now. His fingers danced across the controls. Every action precise. Every movement calculated. Because Marcus Reed had spent 6 months preparing for this exact moment. While other pilots mocked him for being paranoid, he'd been memorizing every emergency procedure while they laughed at his triple-checking. He'd been running simulations in his head. And now, at 15,000 feet over hostile territory with a cargo hold full of medical supplies and a co-pilot whose hands were shaking on the controls, Marcus Reed's paranoia was about to save everyone's lives. Tower, this is Cargo 7. Declare an emergency. Engine fire, number 2. Beginning emergency descent. His voice was steady, calm, like he was ordering coffee, not fighting to keep a burning aircraft in the sky. And in that moment, everyone listening on the radio realized something. The pilot they called paranoid wasn't panicking, because paranoia and preparation look identical until the moment everything goes wrong. Subscribe so you never miss these stories. Tell us in the comments, would you rather be overcautious or caught unprepared? Marcus Reed had wanted to be a pilot since he was 8 years old, but not for the reasons most people expected. It wasn't the thrill of speed or the romance of flight. It was control, the ability to make decisions that mattered, to be prepared for anything, to never be caught off guard. When he'd applied to the Air Force Academy, his evaluations had been stellar. Top marks in academics, perfect scores on aptitude tests. But the psychological evaluation had raised a flag. Candidate demonstrates obsessive-compulsive tendencies regarding safety protocols. Recommend monitoring for anxiety-related performance issues. Marcus had argued his case in person. It's not anxiety, it's diligence. There's a difference. They let him in. Barely. Flight school had been worse. Instructors praised his technical knowledge, but criticized his excessive caution. Other cadets flew with confidence, pushing aircraft to their limits, trusting their instincts. Marcus flew with checklists, backup plans, contingencies for contingencies. You're thinking too much, Reed, his flight instructor had said after a training mission where Marcus had aborted a landing. Approached because the crosswind was 3 knots above his personal comfort threshold, even though it was well within aircraft limits. I'm thinking enough, Marcus had replied. There's a fine line between careful and scared, and there's a fine line between confident and dead. He graduated, middle of his class, not because he lacked skill. His technical flying was flawless, but because he lacked the one thing the Air Force valued above almost everything else, boldness. Now, assigned to cargo transport in Afghanistan, Marcus flew medical supplies, equipment, and personnel between bases. Unglamorous work, safe work, the kind of assignment given to pilots who were competent but not exceptional, the kind of assignment no one talked about at reunions. His fellow pilots ribbed him constantly. The checklist jokes, the what-if impressions, the betting pool on how long his pre-flights would take. Marcus took it all in stride. Let them laugh. Let them think he was afraid. Better to be mocked and alive than bold and dead. But sometimes, late at night, he wondered if they were right, if his caution was just fear dressed up as professionalism, if he was dishonoring Stephen's memory by being so careful. Stephen had been bold, confident, the kind of pilot who trusted his gut and flew like he was born with wings, and Stephen was gone. So Marcus kept checking, kept preparing, kept being the pilot everyone rolled their eyes at, until the day being paranoid became the only reason everyone survived. The fire suppression system dumped foam into engine number 2. The flames died immediately, but the damage was done. The engine was seized, useless, a dead weight hanging off the wing. Fire's out, Novak reported, his voice still shaky, but we've lost the engine completely. I know. Marcus's hands moved across the controls, adjusting trim, compensating for the asymmetric thrust. The aircraft wanted to yaw right hard. He fought it with rudder pressure, his leg already starting to burn from the constant force required. Can we make it to Phoenix on 3 engines? Marcus was already calculating. Weight, distance, fuel consumption, altitude, the mountains between here and the base. No, he said flatly. Where to? Heavy and we're losing altitude. We need to dump cargo or find somewhere closer to land. Dump the cargo? Novak's eyes widened. Those are medical supplies. Fob Phoenix needs them for. They need us to be alive to deliver them. Marcus keyed the radio. Tower. Cargo 7. Unable to maintain altitude with current weight. Request nearest emergency landing site. The response crackled back. Cargo 7. Nearest suitable runway is Bagram, but that's 40 minutes northeast. Can you make it? Marcus glanced at the altimeter. They were descending at 300 feet per minute despite his best efforts. 40 minutes would put them in the mountains. Negative. Need something closer. Cargo 7. Closest option is forward operating base Viper. Single strip, short runway, minimal facilities, 20 minutes south. Marcus pulled up the coordinates, his mind already running the numbers. The strip was barely long enough for a healthy C-130, let alone one limping on 3 engines with battle damage. What's the runway length? 4,000 feet. Novak swore under his breath. We need at least 5 for a safe landing with this weight. Only if we land normal. Marcus said quietly. His mind was already 3 steps ahead, running through a landing profile he'd studied in. Emergency procedures one most pilots only read about and never practiced. What are you thinking? Tactical descent, maximum braking, reverse thrust on all 3 remaining engines the second we touched down. Marcus's voice was steady, but his hands were moving fast, already reprogramming the flight management system. We'll be heavy and hot, but if I can get the approach angle right. That's insane. You've never done a tactical descent with an engine out. No, Marcus agreed, but I've practiced it in the simulator 47 times. Novak stared at him. You practiced emergency landings in your free time. I practice everything in my free time, and that was the moment right there. At 12,000 feet with 1 dead engine, and 20 minutes to figure out how to land a crippled aircraft that Lieutenant Chris Novak understood. Marcus Reed wasn't paranoid. He was prepared. There was a difference. FOB Viper appeared through the haze, a lonely strip of concrete carved into the desert, surrounded by blast walls and guard towers. It looked impossibly small from the air. Viper Tower. Cargo 7 on final approach. Emergency landing. Single engine out, but require full runway and emergency equipment standing by. Roger. Cargo 7. Runway is clear. Fire crews positioned. You're cleared to land. Marcus lined up the approach, fighting the aircraft every inch of the way. The asymmetric thrust made everything harder every turn, every adjustment, every correction. Novak watched the airspeed. You're coming in hot. I know. Need the speed for control. Marcus's eyes flicked between instruments and the runway ahead. Distance, altitude, descent rate, airspeed. Everything had to be perfect. Gear down. The landing gear extended with a thunk that shook the entire airframe. More drag, more problems. Flaps to landing. The nose wanted to pitch up. Marcus pushed forward on the yoke, keeping the descent angle steep, steeper than normal, steeper than safe, according to the book. But the book assumed you had 4 engines and plenty of runway. Read. You're way too fast. I know what I'm doing. The runway rushed up. 200 feet. 150. Marcus's entire world narrowed to the touchdown zone. Every muscle, every nerve, every thought focused on one thing. Getting this aircraft on the ground in one piece. The wheels kissed the concrete with a screech that echoed across the base. Instantly, Marcus's hands moved. Reverse thrust. Full. The 3 remaining engines howled in protest, their thrust reversers directing all their power backward, fighting the aircraft's momentum. Max braking, his feet slammed the brake pedals. The anti-skid system chattered, releasing and reapplying pressure to keep the wheels from locking. The aircraft hurtled down the runway, eating up precious feet. 3,000 feet gone. 3,500. 4,000. They stopped with less than 200 feet of runway remaining. For a long moment, neither pilot moved. The only sound was their breathing and the dying whine of the engine spooling down. Then Novak started laughing, the kind of laugh that comes after escaping death. You crazy son of a, you actually did it. Marcus let out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. His hands were shaking now that it was over, now that the adrenaline was fading. Told you I practiced. Outside, fire crews surrounded the aircraft, foam at the ready. Ground personnel stared in disbelief at the smoking engine, the scorch marks along the wing. The plane that should have crashed, but didn't. The base commander met them at the cargo ramp. Colonel Sarah Mitchell, a 30-year veteran with hard eyes that had seen everything. "Lieutenant Reed," she said, looking him up and down. "That was either the best piece of flying I've seen in 20 years or the luckiest." Marcus thought about the 47 simulator runs, the hundreds of hours studying emergency procedures, the constant double-checking that everyone mocked. Respectfully, "Ma'am, it wasn't luck." Colonel Mitchell studied him for another moment, then nodded slowly. "No, I don't suppose it." Well, she turned to her aide. "Get maintenance on that engine and get these pilots some coffee. They've earned it." The investigation took 3 days. Inspectors crawled over every inch of the aircraft, interviewed the pilots, pulled flight data, reviewed radio transcripts. What they found was damning, but not for Marcus. The engine failure had been caused by a maintenance error 2 weeks prior. A fuel line improperly secured, a problem that should have been caught during routine inspection, but wasn't. The same kind of oversight that had killed Marcus's brother 8 years ago. But this time, someone had been paying attention. Someone had noticed the temperature trending wrong. Someone had caught it early enough to shut down the engine before catastrophic failure. Lieutenant Marcus Reed's paranoia had prevented a disaster. The final report was delivered to Colonel Mitchell's desk on a Thursday morning. She read it twice, then made a call. "I want Reed in my office." Now, Marcus arrived 15 minutes later, stomach tight with anxiety. Investigations usually meant someone was getting blamed, and he'd been the pilot in command. "Sit," Mitchell ordered, gesturing to the chair across from her desk. She slid the report across to him. "Read the conclusion." Marcus scanned down to the final paragraph. The engine failure was entirely preventable and resulted from inadequate maintenance procedures. However, due to the exceptional situational awareness and emergency response of the pilot in command, the aircraft and all personnel aboard survived without injury. LT Reed's early detection of the malfunction and textbook execution of emergency procedures under extreme stress demonstrate the highest standards of airmanship and professionalism. Marcus looked up. "Ma'am, they're calling it a miracle," Mitchell interrupted. "The other pilots at Bagram heard about it. The paranoid pilot, who somehow knew the engine was failing before the instruments did, who'd practiced the exact emergency he needed, who landed a burning aircraft on a runway that was too short." She leaned forward. "You know what I think, Reed?" "No, ma'am. I think there's no such thing as too careful, not when lives are on the line." She pulled out another document. "I'm recommending you for the Distinguished Flying Cross, and I'm requesting you for a new assignment training other pilots in advanced emergency procedures, because apparently you're the only one who actually prepares for worst-case scenarios." Marcus's throat tightened. "Thank you, ma'am." "Don't thank me. Just keep doing what you do, and maybe teach some of these hotshots that confidence without preparation is just arrogance with a death wish." 6 months later, Lieutenant Marcus Reed stood in front of a classroom full of pilots at Bagram Airfield. Some he recognized, some had laughed at his checklists, called him Paranoid Reed, mocked his triple checking. None of them were laughing now. "Emergency procedures aren't just items on a checklist," Marcus said, his voice carrying across the room. "They're the difference between going home and not coming back. Every single one of you will face an emergency eventually. The question isn't if it's when, and whether you'll be ready." He clicked to the next slide, a photo of his brother Stephen in front of a helicopter, young and confident and alive. "My brother died because someone was in a hurry, because someone skipped a step, because someone assumed everything would be fine." Marcus's voice didn't waver. "I refuse to let that happen on my watch." He showed them the fuel line that had failed, explained how the early warning signs were visible if you knew what to look for, demonstrated the landing calculations that had saved them. And then he said the thing that made every pilot in that room sit up straighter. "They called me paranoid, overcautious, too careful, and you know what? They were right. I am all those things, because I've seen what happens when people aren't." After class, Lieutenant Chris Novak approached him. "Good brief, Reed. Really good. Thanks. You know they stopped calling you Paranoid Reed, right?" "What do they call me now?" Novak smiled. "The pilot who saved Cargo 7. The guy who knew. The one who prepares. Marcus nodded slowly. I can live with that, because at the end of the day, Marcus Reed had learned something his brother never got the chance to. Bold pilots make headlines. Careful pilots make it home. And he'd rather be the pilot everyone mocked, who brought his crew back alive, than the confident one they eulogized at a funeral. Some people called it paranoia. Marcus called it love. Preparation isn't paranoia. Caution isn't cowardice. Sometimes the person everyone doubts is the one who saves everyone. The next time someone calls you overcautious, remember, there's a fine line between confidence and recklessness, and the people who check twice are usually the ones who only have to land once. Subscribe so you never miss these stories of courage and careful heroes. Tell us in the comments, are you a risk taker or a double checker? Sometimes the safest hands are the ones everyone underestimates.